All right, brother. So here's how it's gonna go down. I'm gonna beat up on you. I'm gonna be a little bit abusive on this guy. Now I don't know really where he's living, but hopefully he plays the thing with me, and we can just live this one out and just use it for the psychological thesis and fog, nuke, and Mars. At any rate, inside here, finding opportunity in the tech market for what it does. I want to talk about this like it's a problem. There's going to be an immediate thing in the first conversation before I decided why this was an important one for doing psychological because, well, it plays the system. I didn't get too far into it, so I don't know where this is going to go, and I like my rabbits wild, so. But there's some notations about uphill and downhill stuff, and there's also some positions about having that 45 line up in such a way that you lend scale of the Pythagorean theory in such a way that it lines up to the wave functions of what these equations kind of generally represent. And when you're describing your form of what value something has inside of those systems and how to determine what that looks like on a graph, like this abacus over here, danger noodle, uppity down, sideways. However, providing its parameters for the electron shell, the order in which that S type, because you'll see that number in here, and what's that quantified to? It quantifies to the value of this actually having a photon value here. Here, not just, well, it's playing -1 actually. It's being held through time negative, not actually being zero. It would be in the conversation before whatever would click off, given how this cellular mechanics, this cell, when you say what is cyclical about these values, you're talking about it in such a way that these became the W boson, but here's a value of the decay state of hydrogen to helium into a system, and or durium into tritium into the neutrino, or however which way that math is going down, because that's the value that's IH jet or jet there, flaming, shooting something different than normal physics. But normal physics mathematically has enough energy going on in there just to optically say there's how much math inside of here. Right. So, when you really get down to the nitty gritty on that, I'll box it out. Fuck it. Fuck this, fuck that, fuck me, fuck everything in here. I'm going to generalize that equation just to a box, and the box is scaled, inches. So, not only is that, but I can do that repetitively. I can do that again and again and again. What you notice is my speed increases to figure out this line, to measure that line, or just to hit the math again. That some shift over and having a compression or some value in there. There's a really good one I'm looking for. Here we go. When we talk about what curved space-time is, it's still a straight line, but it's curved, and it's also a spherical index. We don't really know what the arc on this trajectory of the conversation is going to be, but it plays to a neutrino, it plays to a photon that has mass, it has W boson graviton effects in terms of vector positions of what it does depending on where you're living in there. For 95% accuracy for the information requires the internal containment to house in such a way that these magnetic frames still turn into Carl Sagan universe loaves for a one-dimensional magnetic gas. Here the neutrinos, or the muons that you're saying are emitted in Hawking radiation. I want to be fair, and this is a good way to describe it, because that's what this would be here given some spin. They're not. Some are zeroed out mass holes that have a lensing effect on what could be when I do your home models, or pull a card on you, Lucy, at the 5-cent psychology being what that does. And, so this mathematics becomes the vector positions when you're actually opposing the Bernoulli's equations to pressure into this. If you wanted to quantify this in a value, then the housing of that thing needs to look like an oil pipeline. Right? That would be the real math on that, and therefore where we generalize the gravity of how those frames work to most common problems while training it. And those things should be common obvious z limits to having a squared platform to the photon, the gluon, which would be in this case the photon, the gluon in this pipe, relative to the W boson or the Z boson, any graph that he's going to have or any graph that I'm going to have. And they could be in superposition with one another and one half. Negative 8 million, 8 million, negative 16 million, 6 million. And whatever way that triangulation works, negative 8 million, 8 million, 16 million, which is this problem, but on a different platform to needing to be through those resistors that are photons and energy of doping chips inside here to say we're backtracking that, loading it up, putting all the ones and zeros in there, ready to fire off when I click this button. And they're still on a straight line, but alternating currents on some of the stuff that goes in here. And again, it's not just the S-type or P-type, but how does that math quantifiably link to some of these standards of the tech sell-off? 8 black holes were found, every week by Lego over there to help position that, now that it was to find 8 players that could figure out all of this to put it down on the ground. You knew enough about this that 8 of them figured out that now the only 8 that are left are really the ones I need to find 8 a month. And the whole entire industry after that can really only go to one of these places unless it has the tools or willing to divert off of that system to photon, neutron, proton, or anti-electron, electron, into a photon again that collides back into another photon, which stack it up.
Inflation, economy opening up, running hot, and that was, we had JP Morgan in there for rates going higher. We had the XLE in there, which is the energy ETF, and this is all on danniles.com, and that's how it's kind of playing out. So that was our number one theme we based the portfolio on, and that's why we've had the best start to any year actually in our 17 years of running the fund, is betting on that, and then betting on the fact that tech would have a tough time.
You can use LIGAR like that. Yeah, why not? You can use LIGAR if you want. It's an NTF, brother. It's a program system that said based off of how droids work, and you get the computer chip going, you can make it whatever the fuck it is you please.
Hey, Dan, danniles.com. It's Tim. Thanks for joining us. And I guess my question for you is the simple one as a portfolio manager and one that spends a lot of time looking at bottom up. What are you doing with a higher, a 160 10-year differently than you were doing at 60 basis points?
Not much, because I think it's going to get to 2% or higher
like
before this is all said and done by late this year. The one thing we did today is, we had a lot of tech shorts on,
where am I
high
going to go?
multiple,
Tech shorts?
no
Well, you're just
profit
opposing E-values into an equation, and you're saying that outputs the graph that the Fed says it'll do this
of shorts
on a
across our
short,
portfolio.
and that's how you hit it. And that takes teams, giants running, then you get on top of it. I'm in charge of this son of a
the bad ones. And so for us, we love days like this because it gives us a chance to, cover some things and then potentially look for names that we like on the other side of it. But I think, the reflation trade in terms of if you're looking at certain sectors like energy, like banks, they have a long way to run because you've had, rates going lower arguably for 40 years, but at least since the global financial crisis, you've had energy people cutting back on spending in that, or the mining sector, or the agricultural sector.
If you do that on your model,
much
from
$0
zero to $1 to $300, whatever the sensible system is, you can't.
It's going to be actually
it always gives you that number for a crew trainer here, and basically every week, every month, you hit the reset button on that thing. Like, this is the new player. You can get on this today. It's the vectors that start the next guy off for a month. Every 6 months you want to do it, and give them a little stretch on that, taper temperature. Yeah.
Hey Dan, it's DanNathan.com here. Listen, I got to know you back in the late 90s when you covered semiconductors and obviously some hardware. These were hot sectors back then. They've been hot right now. Can you help us understand a little bit what's happened in semis just this week alone? I think that Micron is a great example of a company where people think that everything was going really well in the supply demand dynamics, the pricing of DRAM, all that stuff was great. It's a cheap stock. There was more room to run. They pre-announce a great number and the stock goes down 12% in a straight line over the last couple of days. How does that filter into a little bit of the psychology about tech right now in a space that should be doing very well given those dynamics?
Well, there's a standard model of everything.
There's a couple of things to remember.
They all have an index on -1 and 0. And so when you value that system, you're never going to be you never know.
So
Apple's good but bad. Crypto's good but bad. Cicada's good but bad. The Fed's good but bad. China's good but bad.
Obviously, they sell a lot directly themselves. Then they have that manufactured at Han Hai. And then you get around to Micron's shipping to Han Hai, which ships to Apple, which ships to AT&T, right? If you look at inventory in the supply chain,
we're the ones telling you to do it right. We have nothing to do with any of this going wrong. We'll tell you, hey, the crushing
inventory is up a ton. if you look at TSMC's balance sheet and you look at the inventory on their balance sheet,
This
it
is
is a tremendous
for
amount year over
photons,
year as
but
well.
obviously
so
they're doing
got
it for
actually
parallel
inventory
in
in the
chemistry.
smartphone
Now,
supply chain for one.
you get the fourth bit
building
inside
up now.
here.
In other sectors like automotive,
5-4,
PC, it's
this
not that bad.
not having
but
spin
that's one
rotation
space where
involved
it's actually built
in the-
up tremendously.
in the 8
And
and
so I
5.
think, much like a few years ago when DRAM cycle was going to continue forever and, was permanently going to be at a new high, and then all of a sudden prices start to crash. I think you have some risk of that in certain sectors. I'm not sure it's in DRAM or NAND, but I do
first
think
it was
in the wireless
electricity,
supply
then it
chain
was the EM
where they
fields,
play,
then
there
it
is
was
a
the
little bit of
changing
that.
of
And
EM
the stock's
fields,
not cheap, by the way.
and then it's
I mean,
all
it's
that
trading
because
at,
it's
I
a
think,
wave and a
1.5
particle,
times
and
book,
you
if
got
I
to do
remember
both.
correctly. The stock's bottomed
you
out
don't do
in the past
both,
at 0.5. So,
E8.
yes, if you put huge EPS numbers out in the future, it looks great, but that's not one of the, we have other names that we like a lot better in tech, like Google, like Facebook, if you want to be in stuff where you're getting growth at a great price that has a long runway ahead of it.
Algorithm.
And, fortunately today they actually hung in very well, which was interesting, I think. And, they'll benefit as ad rates pick up as we get really strong GDP growth. And so that's kind of where
sometimes
I'm
it's hot as
looking.
shit, and sometimes
today's
it's
a great
like just
acid
moving right
test
along,
of
being a
where are
particle.
people overly optimistic
Not quite at absolute
versus
zero,
where are spaces that
close.
are priced, at a good price. And I think those are two names, for example, that I like much better than commodity semiconductors or semiconducors in general.
Now, depending
Dan,
on
just
how
quickly,
you do what
was there
it is you
anything
do.
that you bought in today's session,
You get
and
a
more
friction
specifically
problem
within
running.
technology, since the NASDAQ is now
Look
down
at 'em.
about 7% for the year?
I really thought about buying some more Google. I didn't end up doing it.
Well, there's uphill,
but
there's
what we
downhill,
did was,
there's-
as I said, a majority of our
We got
shorts
choices.
are all sitting in technology. And we covered about 70% of our short book in the entire fund. And so software, high multiple software stocks with, no earnings, that's where we went in and we covered a bunch because that was the sector we hated the most,
Right.
because that's what's going to get hit hardest when rates go up. But, we're sitting on some cash right now in the fund. I
Make
have
sure
a
you got
feeling
one
over
that
the next
can.
day or
I
two we'll
walked into
start
the store
deploying it.
now.
I think you got 1.9 trillion in